So good evening to you all. And hopefully while you're waiting in the Zoom room, you had a chance to do the 9-round breathing meditation, followed by some concentration meditation. It's always a nice way to spend some time and just really get grounded and present. And I think I'd like to just get going straight away. And I'll try to be mindful of the time as well, so that we can finish like about 10 minutes early, and then we can allow time for some questions and dedications and homework type things, that sort of thing, okay? So that will be the plan. All right, so if it's okay with you, I'll go straight into it, and then we can make some good progress. So we've been looking at the module 3. It's just begun last week, and it's one of the most critical modules that we study of the 14, presenting the path, because it lays out for us exactly the A to Z, or A to Z, as you might say. I'm not sure in America, but the A to Z or A to Z, and the entire pathway from even before we enter the path, and then throughout the 3 scopes, which is what we're looking at. So if you would like, let's do together the refuge bodhicitta prayer, because I know many of you are Buddhist already, so we can jump to that. And then just because of the microphones, keep the microphones off, but please do join in at home with the audio of saying the prayers if you're inclined. So remember that our whole purpose of refuge is to go to liberation. So we'll worry about the 3 principal aspects of the path as we develop more understanding, not this week, but in the subsequent weeks. And so just with as much understanding as you can muster right now of the state that we're in, which is a state where we're continually experiencing difficulties and problems, challenges, not getting what we want, even, with our partners, our family, our general relationships and so forth. Always a key indicator where there's attachment, when we're not getting what we want, we get frustrated, irritated, and so forth. And all the various sufferings we're experiencing, not getting what we want, getting what we don't want is another big one. Meeting with so many obstacles and difficulties and challenges in our everyday life. But of course, the big ones are what we are experiencing, which is what the Buddha noticed: this uncontrolled birth, sickness, aging, and death. And this continues life after life, endlessly. So let that word endlessly sink in for a little bit, because unless we do something different to change the causes of why we suffer, we will perpetually experience the results. So the causes coming under true origins, karma and afflictions, is why we circle again and again and again endlessly in samsara, right now as a human and still with difficulties. But imagine if we're in the lower realms, for instance, and if you're aware of the teachings, even the 6 realms. So just continually circling under the control of karma and afflictions. And so, with whatever understanding of renunciation we have, of self-compassion, really, isn't it? Wanting to be free of our own suffering and the causes of suffering, and then transferring that spotlight, instead of being on ourselves, putting it on all others, how just like me, they're in their same position. And so we can generate not only the self-compassion, renunciation, but we can turn the spotlight to others and not leave even one single sentient being out of this equation, and turn our compassion to great compassion. So the wish to free all sentient beings from all sufferings and bring them to liberation, enlightenment. And then without emptiness of inherent existence, realizing that wisdom, there'll be no goal impossible to achieve liberation or enlightenment. So whatever understanding you have of any of these right now, but as I said, we'll develop them over subsequent weeks, bringing all of that to our going for refuge. And then right from the get-go, we're creating causes for no more samsara, But because we've brought in the wisdom realizing emptiness, seeing how the I, the self, the person going for refuge, in dependence on the Buddha Dhamma Sangha that exists already in others' continuums, the outer refuge, external to us, relying on Buddha Dhamma Sangha externally to us, cultivating it within our own continuum, where we actually become the Sangha jewel, possessing the true paths, true cessations, the Dharma jewel, and eventually becoming the Buddha jewel ourselves. So right from the get-go, if we bring in this wisdom realizing emptiness, seeing how the I, the agent, the action of going for refuge and so forth are not independent in a way that's existing inherently, that's unrelated to anything else. It's clearly all dependent arising. And so with as much of that awareness, then we can direct our mind to not just mere liberation for oneself alone, but great liberation or enlightenment. And so something along those lines, we'll make it more refined as our understanding increases, but that's the essence. So we do it together 3 times if you like. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. So we're wanting to benefit transmigratory beings, which are those who are sentient beings, not just sentient beings, but the sentient beings that circle in samsara. Okay, transmigrate under the control of karma and afflictions. We want to free them from sufferings, free them from samsara, bring them to liberation and enlightenment. All right, so with our structure, we had a look at some of this last week. The life story of the Buddha, I introduced a quote that I want you to keep alive throughout all our teachings and reflect on again and again, not only in the teachings, but also as homework, so we can refresh what that quote was momentarily. But also this week, I would like to look at the 4 greatnesses of the teachings. And I believe Isabella sent out an email recently. So those files, some of those slides that I've used will be attached there to save you hurriedly trying to write down everything. And you can listen knowing that you have access to that. And but that doesn't mean you just sit back and just relax, because people will be doing an exam. And even if you're not doing an exam, you really want to be quite engaged and really, switched on, completely alert, undistracted, and so forth, so that you can develop a more potent seed to carry you on your journey throughout the rest of the DB modules and beyond. So I want to look at the 4 greatness of the teachings, a way of generating respect for the teachings. I want to look at the way to listen in a more elaborated form. Last time I just gave you the essence of being, undistracted, open-minded, and so forth, but we'll look at the details there. And then I want to get into the 3 scopes. We've done Lama Atisha last week. Now with Lama Atisha, you should know some basics, of course, definitely from last week. For instance, that, Lama Atisha, it was in the 11th century. Okay, he died 1054, so in the 11th century before his death, when he spent about maybe like 17 years in Tibet, is where he wrote the great text, the first Lam Rim text. And the Lam Rim text that we all rely on, the path to enlightenment, is that Lam Rim, the graduated path to enlightenment, is elaborated in that text. And so we want to make sure that we fully understand. Then the name of that text is called Lamp, L-A-M-P, Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. So we should retain that in our mind. This lamp for the path to enlightenment that Lama Atisha created in Tibet during his time there is, based on that is Lamrim Chenmo and all the other texts. So this is quite critical that we should know these things, that he wrote that in Tibet when he went there to correct the misunderstandings, thinking that if you're a practitioner of sutra, you don't need tantra. If you're a practitioner of tantra, you don't need sutra. And so there was, errors in their thinking that you don't need to rely on ethics and so forth if you're practicing the highest level of Buddha Dharma. And this is just so unrealistic and outrageous. So that was part of Lama Atisha's willingness to accept even that his life would be shortened by going there, maybe even by 20 years, but he could see the great benefit that would come from such a journey. So we had a look at Lama Atisha already. And as I said, we'll go on to the three scopes today, and in the subsequent weeks, look at the four truths and the three principal aspects and so forth. So let's just refresh that quote. So hopefully you've spent some time, some homework already on this, and I want you to keep it alive throughout all of our weeks and add to it new understanding. So when you applied understanding last week, what does it mean? Do not commit any unwholesome actions. What does it mean, engage in perfect, wholesome actions? What does it mean, subdue your mind thoroughly? How do we do that? What is the method? What is the wisdom? And then this is the teaching of the Buddha. And so as we increase in our understanding, I'd like to see your development of that quote take shape in these subsequent weeks. So it's not necessary to, as you get new information, to discount what you'd learned before. What you learned before may be coming from a perspective of, for instance, before becoming a practitioner of the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma, from the small scope to the middling scope to the great scope. It might be caught up still with those three preliminary contemplations, which we have looked at remember there was like the beginningless mind, the nature of mind, including Buddha nature. So that would have been referring to what we did in the first module, mind and its potential. The spiritual teacher or guru devotion, which I think you guys are doing in January, and precious human rebirth. So those three preliminary contemplations, you do need to know what those three are and have an understanding of them and apply that quote to your understanding at that level. And then as we go through the small scope today, you'll increase your understanding and you'll apply that quote differently. Okay? And then, so what you've done previously won't be wrong. It'll just be more extensive understanding and more applicable to someone with new knowledge. And we'll look at going through, as our knowledge develops, we'll look at going through some of your responses over the subsequent weeks and how they change from last week, how they change from this week. So that's a homework in progress that I'd like for you to engage with and keep active in your mind as we unfold this journey. So the three scopes is where we jumped into momentarily last week, looking at Lama Atisha. And remember Lam Rim, the graduated path to enlightenment. And we saw His Holiness was telling us things, how it's like in Buddha Dharma is not about give me the complete teachings now, give it to me, in the quickest way possible so that I can, develop it in my mind as swift as possible and as cheap as possible. And all of these things that Westerners, we want the quick fix to everything. We don't necessarily want to put in the work and the effort. And so this, His Holiness was teasingly chastising us for having that sort of mentality. So here's these three preliminary contemplations. And so you will have seen that already and have a copy of that from Isabella's email. Okay, so what we're going to do this week then is we're going to go into more detail at these stages here. This is now the lower scope. These are preliminary, so coming before, and these are where we start the small scope. But because we've set with a motivation of bodhicitta motivation to, for the purpose of listening to all these teachings and develop them in our mind, is for the purpose of liberating sentient beings, transmigratory beings. So we're doing it with the bodhicitta motivation. And so the lower scope here, or the small scope, is in common with what we're aiming to achieve throughout the middle scope, throughout the great scope. They're not in isolation where you practice one and not the other. So we, as Mahayana practitioners, we want to focus on the great scope as our goal, but it includes whatever has come before it as the stepping stones, and then it's going to be complete for us. So one of the other questions to bear in mind as we proceed, how does each stage increase our happiness? And I introduced that last week. So that was part of your homework as well, to keep these two homework pieces alive as we go on. Okay. All right. So next week, and maybe even the week after, we'll look at the middle scope. And that involves things like no longer being satisfied with samsara and having a fortunate rebirth like we already have because we continue to suffer, but seeking to be free of all suffering, to be beyond karma and afflictions. And the only way to do that is to recognize that what we call happiness, this temporary happiness that we all crave, is nothing other than in the nature of suffering. So only if we can give up attachment to this temporary happiness would we even think to seek something more lasting. And that's very difficult for us because we do want happiness, we do need happiness, and we satisfy ourselves with temporary happiness. You know, all the good things that happen to us, thinking that's as good as it gets. And that's the biggest misconception that we can make. So while we have this attachment to this temporary pleasure, these temporary happinesses that we experience, then we're not going to be inclined to go beyond that, to seek a higher form of happiness, liberation, enlightenment, which is unchanging in the sense that it is lasting. Once you achieve liberation, you don't fall back. So once you achieve that higher happiness of liberation or enlightenment, you will not experience suffering from that point. You will have not only sought in the small scope, we seek to give up suffering of pain to seek a higher happiness that is still the suffering of change and in samsara. But in this middle scope, we want to give up even that temporary contaminated happiness, the suffering of change. We also want to give up the pervasive suffering of conditionality, that third most subtle form of suffering. And that, if we can give up that, an illustration of that is this body and mind, or the five aggregates, the body and mind under the control of karma and afflictions. If we give up that third type of suffering, which is the ticking time bomb, that any moment we can experience suffering of pain, even death, or suffering of change, and so forth. So we want to give up that third most subtle level of suffering in the middle scope and look at how we can develop the four truths of a noble being in our continuum, those realizations, the 12 links of dependent origination, how we enter samsara under the control of true origins, karma and afflictions, we create true suffering. And if we want to reverse those 12 links, if we want to exit samsara, we need to develop true paths to bring about true cessation. So we'll look at that next week and beyond. And the three higher trainings, ethics, concentration, wisdom. This is our method and wisdom that we're going to follow to achieve that liberation. But still, this isn't enough, because when we get to the great scope, we realize that it's not just ourselves who are suffering, and one sentient being getting out of samsara is nothing when all of our happiness, all of our realizations have come about in dependence on others. So to liberate ourselves alone, from a Mahayana perspective, there feels quite selfish, and we want to make sure that we use our mind in the most meaningful way, not just to liberate ourselves alone, but to bring all sentient beings to liberation. And so this great scope, which is focused on the greatness of limitless sentient beings and having this greatness of mind of bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, then what we want to do is to develop that mind of enlightenment, practice generosity, ethics, and so forth, the six perfections, and be able to achieve the state of a perfect Buddha. And then we can really, with our fully developed love, compassion, wisdom, ability, okay, these qualities in particular, we can enact the welfare of all sentient beings to free them from suffering. Okay, they'll have to do the work themselves, but we can do what we can to be that condition that brings them to enlightenment when they receive the teachings and so forth. Okay, so part of the Great Scope, this is all the sutra, the perfection vehicles here, the sutra vehicle, the perfection vehicle, and part of the Great Scope is also this Tantra. And this is 4 levels of Tantra we'll look at later if we have time. But going into Tantra and all of this, while we haven't even got to junior school perhaps, or maybe we're just in junior school. So these 3 preliminary contemplations would be your preschool, I guess, and then junior school, the lower scope, and then high school, and then we go to university as an undergraduate. And only then, when we have all of these qualifications, do we meet the prerequisites to engage in postgraduate university study. So some people meet the Dharma, and in their first year, they want to, take on Yamantaka and Vajrayogini and all these highest yoga tantras and all of this sort of stuff, but they don't have any understanding of renunciation, bodhicitta, wisdom realizing emptiness. These 3 principal aspects of the path are critical as prerequisites, as is an initiation critical. So how do we get an understanding of these 3 principal aspects of the path? Well, these all depend on these earlier stages. So let's jump into what we want to cover. So this week, so that was introduced partly that slide last week and a little bit more detailed this week. The links, I went into a great elaborate detail last week for the lower scope, and refresh your memory on those by watching the YouTube again if you need to, or taking notes, or both. The links for these I'll go through in more detail as we get introduced to the middling scope, and then the links for the great scope. So let's just focus on what we're doing today, which is a small scope. So it was Lama Atisha, right, in this 11th century, that pulled the 84,000 teachings of the Buddha all together as the heart, the essence of all the Buddha's teachings, which were all taught at various times and also, scattered all over the place in a sense. And he pulled it all together in one picture. So, and that became the graduated path to enlightenment, the Lamrim, piecing it all together so that it makes sense into one single framework. And so I want to look at that framework now in more detail. And so with the small scope, and I believe you have this copy as well. Yes, Isabella, the slide was sent out, right? So with the small scope in particular, what we're fearing now, remember what we do is we bring our Western understanding and we try to make it fit and push it into place to be that same meaning in Buddhism. But it's not like that. Buddha Dharma and our worldly way of living and what we know are kind of like opposites. So some people, therefore, because of our Western way of thinking, naturally we can get a little bit triggered by words like fear and suffering and these sorts of things, right? We can get triggered by, the word guru. We can get triggered by so many things. And so what we need to do is be that open-minded that doesn't try to make our understanding of something fit and push it into place as if it is that in the Buddha Dharma. So if you can be aware if you're triggered, by all means, and like self-nurture and these sorts of things, absolutely. But also, rather than put words in the mouth of the Buddha Dharma and think it's saying all of these things, just remain open-minded to hear and then see if it is the same as what you're thinking it is. So, the word fear, rather than being frightened by the word, it's just what we want to avoid. That's all it is. What do we want to avoid? So in that case, it's not so scary anymore, right? When we use this word fear, it's just what we want to avoid. Right now, we want to avoid suffering of pain. We don't like being physically, emotionally hurt and things like that. Okay? Animals also want to avoid the suffering of pain. So if you need to substitute, by all means, substitute the word fear for what do I want to avoid. So in generating that I'll use the word fear because I don't like to dilute the teachings, but we can add our own flavorings to make it more understandable to us for sure. But if we use this word healthy fear, useful fear, intelligent fear, then, we're using our intelligence. What do we want to avoid? Okay. And so from a Buddhist perspective, the small scope, we want to avoid the miserable rebirth in the lower realms. So this 3 scopes of the Lamrim you also have a copy of, so you can just make some notes to that chart if you wish. So we want to avoid the lower realms. And in particular, we can see with our eye consciousness animal realm. Now, that doesn't mean that there's only animal realm. We don't have the karma to see with our eye consciousness other realms of existence, like the hungry ghost realm, the hell realms. But we know from our human experience, being human has such a broad range. So we are very fortunate. Out of the 8 billion humans, we are very fortunate. To be human is not a precious human rebirth. Many human rebirths are far from precious in their freedom to practice Dharma. So many of those 8 billion are so preoccupied with everything that's in front of them in the most, difficult, challenging way, where they don't have the liberties that we enjoy to sit back in a comfortable room and, feeling nice and warm with all our food and nourishment, all our senses satisfied. We're not under threat, and we can easily listen to the teachings again and again. And, we have this freedom. So to be human doesn't mean you have a precious human rebirth. That's like a subset of precious human rebirth. But as we know, within the human realms, there are, some people who are overcome more so with anger and attachment and ignorance and so forth, right? And so if you don't believe in lower realms, that's okay. You've got to accept animal rebirth, at least, animal realm. But use your understanding of all the different types of sufferings within the human realm, governed by more heightened afflictive emotions, and we can see the great variances there. And so with that, we can begin in time to, after more study and reflection, we can begin in time to extrapolate that out to there could well be other realms of existence where there is more intense suffering than that experienced in the animal realm. Okay, so renunciation at this level is not pure renunciation. We're not renouncing samsara. We're renouncing taking rebirth ourselves in the lower realms. Okay. Now, many of us might still be caught up with attachment to this life and not even believe in past and future lives. So we have to start where we're at. What I'm introducing here, though, is as if we have started the Buddha Dharma from the small scope, which does accept past and future lives. So we may not actually be on the small scope yet. We may be, having done those 3 preliminary contemplations, we may be approaching the small scope in our understanding through DB. Or some of us who might have developed an acceptance, just a correct assumption, not a realization, just a correct assumption, or even just doubt tending towards the fact, the truth, that there are past and future lives, most likely. I don't know for sure. I mean, probably there are. You see, there's still that doubt there, isn't there? It's not entirely saying, I don't know, that maybe they exist, maybe they don't exist. It's not even doubt. It's going, probably there are future rebirths, future lives. Maybe it could be like that. Even just that would be helpful. But then if you can correctly assume with your understanding, not blind faith, not just accepting it, but investigating and analyzing, checking up for yourself. If you can get to a point where you can accept, oh yeah, maybe it does seem like that. You know, from my understanding, my research, my investigation, I can accept that there are past and future lives. I haven't realized it, and I might change my mind, you know, down the track. It's not a realization, but then, you know, one can start to even enter towards the small scope there. And if you can give up attachment to this life that is only focused on like this life's concerns without thinking about future lives, if you can give up that attachment to this life that doesn't think of future lives, if you can give that up, if you can renounce that, then you'll be more inclined to be actually a small scope practitioner at least. Okay? So you want to renounce two things in particular here. You want to renounce the suffering of pain and, you know, and the lower realms and all of this, which is plagued by that suffering of pain. And you also want to renounce giving up thinking that there's only this life and this life's happiness and that's all that matters. Because a small scope practitioner is seeking from the Buddha Dharma, from putting all of this into practice, they're seeking a good fortunate rebirth. Now, what that means is as a human, or there's a God realm, God, demigod realms like this. We can investigate more of that later when you look at the 12 links and so forth. So our goal, if we were a small scope practitioner, we would be satisfied with having what we have already. So if everyone's satisfied already, we can stop the meeting and call it a night. So, you know, or if you're thinking there's more to this, you know, we already have this fortunate rebirth and we still suffer, there's got to be more, then keep listening, because we'll go through methods to make sure that we're developing a succession of precious human rebirths, but even going beyond this. So we want to go beyond just having a higher rebirth, which is still a samsaric being under the control of karma and afflictions and endlessly taking rebirths with no guarantee at the time of death will ripen the seed that projects a fortunate rebirth. Okay? There's no guarantees. We've got to create really strong habits and really develop our mind so that, you know, we can subdue our mind at the time of death and bring to mind virtue. And in particular, if we can develop refuge in our heart and think of the Buddha or Dharma or Sangha, even just one of those, Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, at the time of death will secure a fortunate rebirth. So if we're seeking a succession of good fortunate rebirths, higher realm rebirths, then we're going to need to give up or abandon the 10 non-virtuous actions like killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, like this, lying, and so forth. Because it's from those non-virtuous actions that they're going to bring the result of suffering. And so we'll look in more detail at these small scope topics in subsequent slides. So our method, the means, our method to achieve the goal of higher rebirths means that we have to, as a method, we have to, as our basic level of ethics, refrain from the 10 non-virtues, okay? Abstain from those actions and adopt the opposite of the 10 non-virtues, adopt the 10 virtues. So abstain from the 10 non-virtues, adopting the 10 virtues. Instead of killing, stealing, and so forth, we have to abstain from killing, abstain from stealing, abstain from sexual misconduct, and so forth. So that's our method as a small scope practitioner. That's how we achieve the goal of higher realm rebirths. In particular, I think it was Chandrakirti who says in Madhyamaka Middle Way Studies, from ethics, a fortunate rebirth, or something along those lines. From ethics, a fortunate rebirth, I think is what it says. So from ethics, and to get a precious human rebirth, we need as a basis ethics. For any fortunate rebirth, God realm, demigod, human, we need ethics. But for a precious human rebirth, we also need a practice of the 6 perfections, like generosity and so forth. And we also need to make stainless aspirational prayers that links the virtue we have created to that life that we take rebirth as another precious human rebirth. So we need those 3 causes in particular: ethics, generosity and the other perfections, and stainless aspirational prayers. So at least ethics for a fortunate rebirth. If you want more than just a fortunate rebirth, you want a precious human rebirth, you need those other 2 attributes, causes. So at this stage, this is the method, right? As far as the wisdom, so not just refraining from non-virtue and cultivating virtue, but we need to have some sort of very strong conviction in karma, actions and results. And this wisdom at this stage is called a worldly, it's all within samsara, worldly, correct view. The correct view is opposite to the wrong view that says karma doesn't exist. It's not the wrong view. This is a correct view, and it's within samsara. So it's a worldly correct view. And that correct view is that from virtuous actions, it will bring the result of happiness. From non-virtuous actions, it will bring suffering results in the lower realms. The small scope practitioner at least has that sort of wisdom. So therefore will refrain from killing, knowing it'll bring suffering results. By abandoning killing, will create fortunate rebirth results. Okay? So that's at that level of the small scope. Does that make a little bit of sense? Are you comfortable with where that's headed? Yeah? Good on you, Terry. I can see some, yeah, good. Some of you are comfortable. That's great. So let's continue then, because I do want to make a bit of progress. All right. So then in the medium scope or the middling scope, this time, what do you want to avoid? You're using your intelligence to say, I don't want, what is it that you don't want? You don't want suffering in any of samsara, cyclic existence. These rebirths, this goal, a higher rebirth, is in samsara. You don't even want that. So you don't want a miserable rebirth. And also, you don't even want a higher realm rebirth. You want out of being under the control of karma and afflictions. So that's what we want to avoid, is any sort of suffering in cyclic existence. So we don't want the suffering of pain. We don't want the suffering of change, the temporary happiness. We don't even want that 3rd kind of suffering, the most subtle, having a body and mind under the control of karma and afflictions. So now we renounce samsara, that pervasive suffering, the 3rd type of suffering. We renounce samsara because what we're seeking is liberation. This is the higher happiness that we're seeking. It's an ultimate happiness. It's a lasting happiness. This higher rebirth here is not lasting happiness. We can take rebirth under the control of karma and afflictions and experience lower realm rebirths again in the future. So this liberation will be ultimate lasting happiness. That's what we're seeking. And whilst we have any sort of attachment to even to temporary happiness or to our body, we will never achieve it. So, so therefore, what we're looking at abandoning here is not just the 10 non-virtuous actions, no more killing, stealing, etc. We're looking at abandoning the causes of why we suffer. True origins, the 2nd of the 4 noble truths, true origins, true causes. And the Buddha has told us that those true origins of why we suffer is because of karma and afflictions. You can think of it as like our afflictive obscurations, which means that which hinders liberation. So while we have karma and afflictions, we cannot achieve the goal of liberation. And so here we start to see the real meaning of renunciation. Now it's pure renunciation. It's this determination to emerge from samsara, to leave samsara, emerge from samsara, and direct our mind, our goal, towards liberation. So we'll look at this next week in much more detail. So right now, just let the seeds be planted, and we'll water them next week and give them lots of sunlight so they grow. So now looking at the means, the method by which we achieve the goal, liberation, pure renunciation, developing this mind that seeks to be free of samsara and achieve liberation. Okay? It's a determination. It's a very strong mind, a determination definitely to emerge. So this is when we generate that realization of renunciation, then we attain a path. Okay, so a path is a consciousness, it's a realized mind, but we can now, with the mind of renunciation, enter a path to achieve liberation, or best, to achieve enlightenment. But if we're going to use that renunciation to achieve enlightenment, we're going to need it to become bodhicitta. Okay, it's going to need to be even more strengthened. So renunciation in its pure form, when it's realized, becomes a path. You could enter into the, what do we call it these days? Without any looking down on, we can just say for now the Hinayana, until I can find a better word, Hinayana, Mahayana. It certainly doesn't have the connotations that we can give it these days, and as if one's better and looking down on the other. We're seeing here that we need these lesser scopes here of the small and middling. We need those to achieve the great scope. We can't look down on them. We can't denigrate the Dharma, not at all. So just for the sake of ease at the moment, until we can come down on a better word, it's difficult. So renunciation. Renunciation alone will not achieve this result, though, this goal. We need to bring, that's the chief method, but we need to bring more method and more wisdom. Method and wisdom, two wings, right? So if we're going to fly to the goal of liberation, we need as our chief method this renunciation, this pure renunciation. And we need to develop the three higher trainings. Concentration is built on independence on ethics. Wisdom is built independence on concentration. We saw in module 2 that we develop analytical meditation and placement meditation so that we can develop calm abiding and special insight. So if you're going to chop down a tree, a very big tree, you're going to need a strong arm, your ethics. You're going to need a steady arm where you hit at the same place each time. If you're hitting randomly all over the tree, it's never going to fall to the ground, right? So you need that concentrated, strong arm, concentrated, hitting the same spot, and you need a very sharp axe, which is your wisdom. And then you'll be able to, cut the tree down, cut down samsara. So now with the wisdom, it's no longer just having a worldly correct view, having this, belief in karma, actions and results. But now you need the same wisdom that we need for whether it be liberation or enlightenment. You need this wisdom realizing emptiness. Emptiness of what? It's not nothingness, emptiness of independent existence. What's the opposite of independent? Dependent. So you're realizing that things lack or are empty of independent existence, where they stand alone as like one thing, unrelated to anything else. That is wrong. The inherent existence is wrong. When you realize the lack of inherent existence, that things don't exist that way, they do exist. How do they exist? Dependently. Okay, so when you had this correct view, the wisdom realizing the lack of independent existence because things exist dependently, they're a dependent arising, they don't exist in this one solid way, concrete way. When you realize that, then you have the perfect wisdom to achieve liberation or enlightenment, depending on your main method. In this case, renunciation. In the great vehicle, bodhicitta. So that wisdom realizing emptiness is common for both those goals. Okay? I want to spend some time on this small scope. So let's just quickly go through the great scope because we're going to spend more time on it later. What do you want to avoid? What do you have an intelligent, useful, healthy fear about? This time it's about any sentient being suffering. You want all of them to be free, not just yourself to be liberated. You want all sentient beings to be free of samsara. Or you could say, here we said the knowledge of obscurations is what we need to abandon. And the great scope practitioner needs to abandon that which hinders omniscience. So another way of looking at it could be this knowledge obscurations. Either one would be correct. They each bring different flavors. So what do we renounce? Well, not just lower realms and not just suffering in samsara, but what the great scope practitioner is doing is renouncing that self-centered attitude. Quite often it's called self-cherishing. But if that brings up wrong connotations, you can think of it as self-preoccupation, where you think about yourself so much at the expense of others. You're so self-consumed, self-preoccupied, self-centered. And so we want to renounce that attitude because we don't want to focus on me and my happiness, excluding others. I'm more important, excluding others. Because in this great scope, it's our care is for every single living being, no one left out. So if there's a so-called enemy, even they are included and perhaps even more important in some ways as our method for our practice. Okay, they become our greatest teacher of patience and so forth. So what we're seeking is Buddhahood or enlightenment. We need to abandon all the imprints of the afflictions, as well as karma and afflictions, as well as the 10 non-virtuous actions. You see how it's all building on top? So this great scope here is not practiced in isolation, but in dependence on the earlier stages. The main method is this method of enlightenment, the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, 2 aspirations. For the welfare of all sentient beings, I wish to achieve enlightenment because then I can truly help them and benefit them and free them from suffering. So these 2 aspirations for the welfare of all sentient beings, that's our driving force in whatever we're doing, our causal motivation for any action. For the welfare of all sentient beings, I wish to achieve enlightenment. That's mind of bodhicitta or mind of enlightenment, sometimes called mind generation. That's our chief method. Without the chief method of renunciation that seeks to be free of this 3rd type of suffering, okay, we cannot go on to achieve bodhicitta. You cannot develop bodhicitta unless you have developed renunciation that seeks for yourself to be free of all suffering of samsara. Then you really understand what suffering of samsara is, this pervasive suffering of conditionality, how you are programmed by karma and afflictions to suffer again and again in any moment. Only when you get a good understanding of true suffering and the causes of suffering, true origins, and wanting to seek free of that, only then could you possibly genuinely wish that for others. And that would be developing this mind of enlightenment that seeks enlightenment for the welfare of others. So without renunciation, there can be no bodhicitta. So the chief method is bodhicitta, but we need to practice the 6 perfections to accumulate the merit to support our wisdom realizing emptiness, which is the same wisdom realizing emptiness in the middling scope. But now we're wanting to abandon not just afflictive obscurations, karma and afflictions, but even the imprints of the afflictions, the very subtle stains, appearances of true existence and everything like that. So we need a lot of merit for that. And therefore, we need to develop this mind of bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness. And when we're not meditating on emptiness with a bodhicitta motivation as our causal motivation, then we're out practicing generosity and ethics, non-harmfulness and patience and so forth. We're accumulating an infinite merit because it's motivated by bodhicitta. So once again, for the benefit of all sentient beings, we engage in this action of generosity. May all sentient beings achieve enlightenment through this practice of generosity. Whatever action we do, all we do is change the motivation, whether it be going to work each day. We change the motivation, caring for our family, change the motivation. We're still doing the action of caring and going to work and so forth, but now we're doing it with a mind that this too, this being that we're benefiting is a sentient being. Our family members are sentient beings. So just like this one sentient being is suffering under the control of karma and afflictions, I will engage in these actions of preparing this beautiful meal to nourish them and support them in developing their good nature, good heart. And I do that with the motivation so that one day they can be entirely free of all suffering and quickly achieve enlightenment. You've just served a meal with bodhicitta. Remembering that one sentient being in front of you represents all sentient beings. The action's the same. The motivation has changed. The result is inconceivable. Huge. So these are the three scopes, and I really need for you to have a very good understanding of this. I will backtrack at times to bring out the most important points, but try to hold that whole chart in your mind. With a good understanding, okay? So these are preliminaries to develop bodhicitta. And then this is all the perfection vehicle, the sutra path. So then in the great scope, you would go on to Tantra, okay? So the entire Lam Rim, all 84,000 teachings, Lama Atisha pulled all of those together and structured them in a specific way so that one person could progress through all those stages of the path. Made it so super clear for us. And so even though that happened in the 11th century, we are still the beneficiaries of Lama Atisha working for our benefit. I mean, incredible, incredible. We're so lucky. So when we look at the greatness of the Dharma, we have a little bit of theory that we have to cover in this module, and I didn't want to do too much of it last session, but we're going to have to go through it a little bit. Now, we can go through in a very summarized way because I've given out or I haven't given out yet, but I will give out today the next two slides on the four greatnesses, and I'll give out the actual way to listen to the Dharma slides. Okay, so you can just sit back and get an overall view, and therefore that also allows me to go a little bit more quickly through some of these topics because we want to get into the meat of it all, right? So the greatness of the Dharma is all part of the Lam Rim, and it's to generate the respect in the teachings. And so Lama Tsongkhapa in Hymn for Experience or Song of Experience, he says, through it, you can realize that all the teachings are without contradiction. As we go through various stages of the entire Lam Rim, some instructions are going to be more potent and necessary for a particular level of development. But once we've developed that stage, that realization, then we're going to be primed and ready to learn something different. And sometimes it might even seem as if it's contradictory, but it's not contradictory. It's just dependent on what's needed for that individual at that particular time. Same when you go to the doctors, or if you go to a Tibetan doctor, for instance, well, let's just stick with normal everyday stuff we'd go to. Okay, so when we go to the doctors or something like that, sometimes the doctor will give us a particular medicine to get whatever illness we've got. When it's in an acute stage, they'll give us a high dose of something, right? But then as we've got things under control with our illness, then that medicine will either be totally changed or lessened. It doesn't remain the same, does it? It changes. Depending on when we change, it changes and adapts to us. So yeah, sometimes you can go to with certain, like if you've got lung from a Tibetan medicine point of view, and they'll advise you to eat meat because it's very like heavy, so it's grounding. And then if you have other dispositions, and you go, they'll say, keep away from meat, So they'll give contradictory advice. Eat meat, don't eat meat. But it's not contradictory advice because it's one particular person at one particular time. They needed this. They no longer need this. This person now needs this. So this is a developmental process. And so the teachings are not contradictory at all, but catering for a particular person at a particular stage. So the most important one for us here of the four is that it would be awesome for us to understand all of the teachings of the Buddha as an instruction, personal advice, instruction. So that's really very critical. We need to apply what we read, what we study. We need to apply it to our own continuum to subdue our own mind. And, applying the teachings means ourselves abandoning the 10 non-virtues, cultivating the virtues, and so forth. Applying all of this as instructions for practice. This one says, easily find the intention of the Buddha, the conqueror. I'll have a look at that on the next slide in more detail. And to be protected from the abyss of very faulty conduct. When we understand the four greatnesses, we're going to be protected and not make grave mistakes. Okay, of the gravest one being abandoning the Dharma. So we'll just have a quick look at these. So not contradictory, a guide for one person to become Buddha. Some instructions applied at different times. So some might have a temporary benefit and some will have an ultimate benefit, depending on the capacity of the student and the interest. So advice for one is not advice for all. It's advice for one at a particular time to develop a particular realization and so forth. So you've got these, as your notes, you've got the screenshots already. Feel free to take screenshots any other stage throughout the teachings though. So occurring as personal advice. So it's occurring to you. So we have to apply it to our own mind. Quite often when we learn a bit of Dharma, we intellectualize the Dharma and we focus on what everyone else is doing wrong, but we don't sort of look at our own mind. We don't subdue our own mind. And so when we recognize what others are doing and it's not in accord with the Dharma, at least you've recognized it, but do stop there and turn the spotlight back on oneself rather than correcting everybody else and staying outwardly focused on everyone else. We need to turn it back to ourselves. So we have a personal responsibility to, if we want the teachings to remain, the Buddha teachings, each of us have a personal responsibility. They won't remain without us carrying them forward. So the more we can understand the teachings, the scriptures of the Buddha, showing us, revealing us through all the stages of the path, how to develop these inequalities, eventually we'll get the realization. And then we will become, Sangha jeweled, Arya Sangha, sorry, and then an Arya Buddha. So we have a responsibility to study, reflect, and meditate on the teachings and to be upholders of the Dharma, scripture, and realizations. And so we need to practice what we've heard. And then, so therefore, whatever we learn in these three scopes is for our personal practice. There's not something separate that we need to do. What do we meditate is on what we've studied. There's not something separate. We don't go and do retreat on something different to what we've studied. It's all related. This study, reflection, meditation, it builds on top of each other and keeps, circling through them. Okay, so using the Dharma mirror. Okay, so rather than being outwardly focused on everyone else, we look in the mirror of Dharma and we see that we have ourselves the dirt on our face. And we use here we go, put a glass cleaner. We can use the cloth, the method and wisdom to clean our own face in the mirror of Dharma. Okay, rather than me cleaning your face right now, I need to look at my own face and my own dirt. All right, so this you already have, the greatness of being able to easily discover the Buddha's intentions. Here we're talking about the three scopes and the three principal aspects of the path. This is what we need to quickly realize. And we rely on all the teachings, all the commentaries, and all of that sort of stuff to try to make understanding of it. We won't get really beyond an intellectual understanding unless we rely on the virtuous friend, the spiritual friend, the person who's embodying those teachings, those realizations, and can show us how to develop them. And so from Guru devotion, we receive the blessings or the inspiration to practice those teachings in a continued way to develop that traction. And eventually they will become realizations in our own mind. Without the Guru, everything remains dry, intellectual knowledge, and that's all. So what we're trying to achieve here and understand is the three principal aspects of the path: renunciation, bodhicitta, wisdom, realizing emptiness, the correct view. So if we can do all of this, then particularly what we can do is stop any negativities from being created. So if we can treat all, number 2 was about as personal instructions, wasn't it? And so if we can, let me just go back for a sec here. So if we can here see things as not contradictory, right? That things are applying at a particular time in our development, so we can be open-minded to see that this teaching is for this particular stage. If we can do that and we can treat them as personal advice and personal instructions, then what's going to happen more easily is we're going to be able to understand the essence of the teachings, the three principal aspects of the path, the entire Lam Rim, and we're going to be very careful about making sure that we don't abandon the Dharma. So a great misdeed would be to abandon the Dharma. Quite often you see things like you get a text and then people, they put things on top of the text, like their glasses, their phone, they put it on top. They put magazines and junk reading on top. They put it on the ground. They have no respect for the teachings here as being what we need to digest and carry within our heart. And so that really I find challenging when people put their text on the ground or things on top of it. This is the highest. On your altar, this is the highest, higher than the Buddha on your altar. The texts often go at the top because the Dharma is what we need to develop the realizations of. The Dharma is our true refuge. The Buddha can't do it for us. And so we need to develop this sincere respect of the teachings and not put any of the teachings down. So if we're great scope practitioners, we need the middling scope. We need the small scope. We can't say that that's lesser in the sense that it's not important and therefore I don't need to do that. That's wrong thinking. Or study is too hard. There's too much information. Why do we have to do this presenting the path? I'll just wait till the next module. It's too much. We're going through 84,000 teachings in 6 weeks. It's going to be lengthy at times, but there is nothing more that we need to be doing right now. The only reason it's too hard at any particular point in time is because we don't have the imprints. And so getting the imprints is how it becomes more easy over time. So Hinayana, Mahayana, it's not like one versus the other. This is wrong thinking or theory, study and practice. Oh, I just want to practice. I just want to meditate. I don't want to do the study. This is wrong thinking. This is abandoning the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha. And so we definitely don't want to do anything like this. We want to pay respect even to a single syllable. A prayer flag that's fallen on the ground with syllables. Put it in a high place, Okay, so the way to listen, I'll give you the slide for, and I did give an abbreviation of it last week, but we definitely need to know this, particularly people doing exams and stuff like that, right? So we need to be not like an upside down vase or vessel where nothing can get poured inside. So whatever pure Dharma we're trying to pour inside your cup, if it's upside down, nothing's going in. So that's where your body's there. Your camera might be off and you might be doing the dishes or whatever, whatever you're distracted by. Nothing's really of much benefit then, because you're not really with a undistracted mind. So do you know when you read a book, right? And you read a book and you get to the end of the chapter and you go, oh, hang on, what was all that about? You've forgotten what it was about. You read it, but you didn't make any sense of it. You didn't pay attention to it. So if someone says you go to a teaching, oh, what was the teaching about? Oh, yeah, I don't know. I think it was on compassion. Okay, so you didn't really pay much attention, right? Because your mind must have been quite distracted. So when your body is present, but if your mind's distracted doing everything else, then it's no different to going to the teaching or not going to the teaching at all. So listen in the best ways, personal instructions and advice. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? The greatness of the teachings, number 2. The other fault is instead of having an upside down vessel, now it's up the right way, but it's so filthy and dirty and it's got all pollutants in there. It's not going to be drinkable, that nectar. So whatever's in there as pollutants or poison is going to corrupt the purity of the Dharma, the purity of the water. And so if we've got very strong opinions and we're not open-minded and you're coming to learn about Buddhism, but you're bringing your own strong opinions that are not Buddhist, and you're trying to make it all fit to your way of thinking, that's not going to work. If you're just going to find fault, that's not going to work. So definitely don't just listen and accept it to be true because it's said. Never, never, never with blind faith. Treat it like a hypothesis, but you, the scientist, have to check up and examine, investigate, and analysis and see what makes sense for you. And nothing will make sense for you if you're closed-minded and blocked. But if you're open-minded, it will really help. 8WC is 8 worldly concerns. So if you're receiving the teachings, but it's all about what you can gain for this life, good reputation and so forth, this or just happiness of this life, this is not a motivation to bring to Dharma. And from a Mahayana point of view, if you're coming just to achieve self-liberation, that's a middling scope practice. So if that's your goal, from a Mahayana perspective of wanting to achieve enlightenment, that's also not enough. That's going to corrupt your listening. So you want to have a bodhicitta motivation and not just accept blindly and check up and investigate. And then instead of a vessel that's upside down or up the right way, but with all these wrong ideas and wrong thinking and so forth, rigid ways, then another fault would be this time you've got a cup up and it's up the right way, but there's all these holes in it. So you can't drink from that nectar because it's falling out everywhere else. So the ears are open, you've got a good motivation, but if you don't listen carefully, you're going to quickly forget. Okay? So that means we need to review what we did last week. We need to review what we do this week. And we need to, next module, go back and review the previous modules. You need to keep it alive, living, breathing. And so do take notes, definitely, particularly those doing the exams. All right, so let's move quite quickly now. So the method and wisdom to achieve the goal of the small scope, the fortunate rebirths. I'm going to fly through some of this because we've only got about, say 10 minutes that I want to spend on this, and before going to some questions and so forth. So remember I said I'll introduce some revision for those points. Here they are here. Specifically, we're talking about future lives, right? We believe in future lives if we're on a small scope. Why do we need to realize future lives? Because we want to make sure that we don't take rebirth in the lower realms, that we can abandon non-virtuous actions, not do them, refrain from them, and engage in wholesome virtuous actions. This is a teaching of the Buddha, right? This is how we're going to subdue our mind with method. And we need to be guarding our karma. Even small drops fill a bucket. Small negative actions increase and bring great sufferings. Small virtuous actions, like little drops in a bucket, they also increase and bring great results. So we don't not do an action that's small, that's virtuous, because it will bring a great result. So we don't refrain from those small actions. We do whatever action, however small or great, if it's virtuous. But with the non-virtues, we find it not difficult to refrain from killing a human, but do we kill mosquitoes and sort of justify it as a small action? It will bring great results that are negative. So having that wisdom is going to be what we need, joined with the method to get an upper realm rebirth. Okay, so what we want to do, Lama Atisha is telling us, know that those who by whatever means seek for themselves no more than the pleasures of cyclic existence are persons of the least capacity, the small scope. We want to aim for much greater than that. And so in subsequent modules, remember, you're going to go through in a lot of detail the Lam Rim. So I want to resist going through great detail, and I'll just quickly go through some of the slides, focusing on key aspects that you'll need to hold, like for your module completion. So the most important thing here, knowing the 3 roots, 9 reasons, 3 decisions, is knowing the 3 roots at this early stage. When you do death and rebirth module, you need to know all of it. But right now, you just need the 3 roots. Death is certain is the first. So the Buddha is teaching here that everyone has to die, and our lifespan is continuously decreasing. With every out breath we take, that's one less that in our number of breaths that we have in this life. And every time our heart beats, that's one less it's going to beat in the future. And it doesn't. If we are to check up and be honest, the amount of time that we spend on our spiritual practice is actually very, very, very little. And so I would assume next, maybe I'll leave that for now. No, let's just go on. Okay, don't worry. So everyone's going to die, and the time's decreasing, and the amount of time we have left, we don't know. Death could come today. So how old am I? I've been calling myself 53 for about 11, 12 months, but I just worked out the other day I was only 52. So I could die before my 53rd birthday, which is the 17th of September. It's quite possible. So I haven't been 53 in reality if I'm 52 now, but I may not actually make my 53rd birthday. We don't know. Death could come even today. And when you think like this in Buddhism, then you use your time very wisely. You make sure that your actions are mostly beneficial. So you come to this decision or conclusion, I must practice Dharma. So when you know, and please know, take a screenshot at the end if you need, the 3 roots, or write it down, death is certain. The conclusion you want to come to in your understanding is that there's no time to waste. I must practice the Dharma now. Dharma will be giving me the causes of happiness. Happiness, why? Of future rebirths as a small scope practitioner. The time of death is uncertain. So while death is certain, the time of death is uncertain. Death is definitely going to come. The fact that we've taken rebirth, we will definitely have to die. But when? We don't know. Could be today. So we don't have a fixed lifespan. Not everyone gets to 85, 90, or even 50. There are many causes of death, even the things that sustain us, things that that ordinarily would help us, like maybe going to hospital if we're sick. Hospital might end up being the cause of our death. If we get infections or things like this, have a bad reaction to the medicine. Our roads that we use are so beneficial, and our car is so beneficial to get from A to B, but we might have an accident and so forth. Okay. There are so many causes of death. Even things that are supposed to sustain our life can be the cause of our death. This body is extremely fragile. People have died of a hiccup, a peanut. Can you imagine? Ridiculous, right? So fragile. So there's more urgency that comes with this second decision. We no longer just think I must practice Dharma because death is certain. But now it's like, I don't know when I'm going to die. It could even be today or tomorrow or next week. So I can't prolong it anymore. I must practice the Dharma now. I can't keep putting it off until I retire or when the kids leave home and things like that. All right. So then the third one you need to know, so only the spiritual practice will be able to help at the time of death. So if we think about what's most important to us, is probably our family and friends, things like that. But even at the time of death, and money is pretty important to us as well, because we spend so much time working and amassing money, and none of these things are going to help us. So all the money we amass will be left behind. Our loved ones at the time of death will be left behind. They cannot do it for us. A mother would happily die instead of their child, happily, and yet cannot do that. So we ourselves alone come into this world alone. We have to exit alone. And so everything we care about in this life, our wealth, our family, our friends and possessions, none of it we can take with us. And yet one thing that is certain is that death is certain. And at the time of death, it's only the Dharma that we have practiced that we can take with us to our future lives. So this conclusion, instead of just, I must practice Dharma now, we make sure that in this third decision, that our Dharma that we practice now is pure or free of worldly concern, free of being caught up with, our reputation and the gains of this life and so forth. Okay, so now we're looking at future life rebirths and trying to get a fortunate rebirth by recognizing death is certain, time of death is uncertain, and only spiritual practice will be of any help, because that's the virtue we take with us. Our body will just become a corpse. Our mind will continue. Whatever seeds we have on our mind, virtuous or non-virtuous, will go to subsequent lives. Only the virtuous ones will be of benefit. So please learn those three roots very well, maybe even the three decisions. And then in your meditations, you can, hold these conclusions, single-pointed concentration. Prior is analytical, then single-pointed, hold these conclusions for at least a minute or so. All right, so refuge, I'm going to skip over for now, and we'll cover refuge when we do the refuge prayer, as we have been and as we will continue to do. So karma, we're on karma, and there's many misconceptions about karma. Like karma has no menu, you get what you deserve, and I hope karma slaps you in the face before I do, and all these negative connotations about karma, misconceptions. Dear karma, I have a list of people you missed. This is not the approach of karma. Karma tends to focus in a wrong way on the negative things. People who create their drama deserve, they focus on that word deserve their own karma. This is not the correct approach to karma. Karma is about taking personal responsibility for our actions. And that's virtuous actions, as well as refraining from the non-virtue, adopting the virtuous actions. This is our responsibility if we seek the goal of good future rebirths and liberation and enlightenment. So please don't be one-sided about karma. Know that it is all-encompassing and includes many aspects. And so in your module on karma, you'll look at the 4 characteristics, how karma is definite, and from virtue comes happiness, from non-virtue, suffering. So I'm not going to go through the detail, okay, because I want to focus more on frameworks and structures. So then karma increases. You do one small action, but it brings big results. So you refrain from even the smallest, and non-virtue, and create even the smallest virtue. This is all coming in the karma module. You don't meet with karma that you haven't created. You cannot meet a result if you haven't created the cause. You cannot end up with a doctorate of philosophy if you've never attended a single class. If you haven't created the causes, you cannot experience the result. So in the same way, that applies with karma. So if you want good things to come to you, have you created the good results? If you're experiencing a lot of difficulty and challenges, they are results, which means you've created the causes, which means you need to purify non-virtuous karma and stop creating more negative karma. Okay? Whatever we don't like is a result of a karma we have created in a long time past. Buddhism is talking, remember, this is the small scope. We're talking about already having an understanding of past and future lives. We're not talking about this life alone. And so when we come to Buddha Dharma and we don't yet have this conviction or correct assumption or even doubt tending towards the fact that future lives exist, we bring our misconceptions and we try to make it all fit together, but it doesn't fit together because we're coming from a one lifetime view. And so we'll never be able to answer the questions of why bad things happen to good people or why good things happen to bad people. If we have a one lifetime view, that is not karma. Karma is looking at cause and effect, actions and results over beginningless lives we've had so far. And so we've been anything and everything, all realms of existence. We've done all actions, all negative actions. We've done it all. And so when a result ripens for us and we don't like it, it's because we've created the cause. So therefore we need to purify and we need to do what is exactly opposite. If we're always getting sick because we're killing, or, then we need to make sure we're saving lives and not killing. Okay? Let's have a look. Karma never goes to waste. So let's say we've killed and it was lifetimes ago. Well, that karma remains in our mind stream and will ripen when it meets its conditions. So we need to engage in purification actions, and there's nothing that cannot be purified. So best to purify before these results happen to us. So we need to purify whatever negative actions we've created and whatever good actions we've done. We don't want them destroyed by anger or wrong views. We want them to ripen. We want them to increase. And so we dedicate that virtue, okay, for enlightenment with all the virtue of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So just to have a quick look at, I can just jump ahead here to a couple of slides. And let's see, that'll do. I'm aware of the time. Good. I can just do maybe a couple more slides and then we can look at doing some Q&A and things like that and dedications. Okay, share. Okay, so with the karma, we're talking about karma. Now, karma is going to bring different results. So it's good to know these 4 results. Fully ripened result. Results similar to the cause in terms of experience. Results similar to the cause in terms of behavior and environmental result. So when you engage in an action of killing, for instance, you will experience a fully ripened result of taking rebirth in a lower realm. We've all engaged in killing. We all have countless seeds for lower realms in our rebirth, as rebirth in lower realms, just from killing. Now, the more intense, maybe it was more slow, sadistic, like this, then that's going to be a more torturous ripened result than if we killed quickly, okay? Maybe even out of compassion. But even if it wasn't out of compassion, let's say you've just killed very quickly a mosquito or something like that. It's still a killing. It'll bring a result. A cause will bring its effect. But it's very different to the result of sadistically, slowly killing, right? These results should be very different, and they will be because the causes are very different. So if you killed your fully ripened result would be rebirth in the lower realms. The result similar to the cause will be in terms of experience and then behavior. So let's say you're born human after some time in the lower realms, many lifetimes perhaps. When you're next born human, then you will experience results where you have a lot of sickness, allergic reactions, maybe a shortened lifespan. You'll experience results from having killed in the past. Okay? And these will come in those, you might even be killed. And then let's say in terms of behavior, because of your past killing, then what might happen is you develop the habit to kill. So you've killed in the past, that seed, karmic seed, karma increases, it increases, many potencies, and you may develop a habit where you're going to kill again in this life. That's a result from that cause of having killed in the past. This is in some ways the worst one because we're continually perpetuating this whole process. Then there's an environmental result as well. And the environmental result is the type of environment you're born into. And let's say it's like in a war zone, for instance, where there's a lot of killing happening around you, or maybe things that sustain life. Maybe they're not accessible. Like maybe there's no, hospitals and medicines and things that healthy food that will sustain life. Maybe the water's like polluted. These sorts of environmental impacts would be a result of past killing. So that's something you definitely need to know. And also, you can purify all of the non-virtue that we've created so that we don't have to experience these results of killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and so forth, harsh speech, whatever, any of the 10 non-virtues. If you regret an action, then actually, I think on the next slide, I've got this in a bit more detail that I can take you to. The fully, let's just say for now, power of regret, you can purify the result similar to the cause in terms of experience. The fully ripened result of taking rebirth in, say, the lower realms due to your killing, hell realm, if it was really sadistic and slow and deliberate like that. The remedy, I'll talk about that on the next slide. The cure, the remedy, will stop rebirth in the lower realms. And if you develop the power of restraint, where you refrain from an action, it will curb your behavior so that you will not create the result similar to the cause in terms of your behavior, the habit to continue to do it again and again. And then in the environmental result is purified by the power of reliance, independence on Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the 3 jewels, and sentient beings developing a bodhicitta motivation. So refuge and bodhicitta. This is the reliance, generating refuge and bodhicitta, independence on the 3 jewels and sentient beings. We develop the power of reliance. And with these 4 powers, let's have a look on this last slide I want to show you. The power of regret is the most important one of all. If you do a negative action like killing, for instance, then you can purify that so that it doesn't bring all those 4 results that we just looked at of being killed and having medicines that don't work for you and, taking rebirth in the lower realms or being born in difficult environments or having the habit, whatever. If you generate the power of regret and a sincere, strong regret, then that will help with the power of restraint. The stronger your regret of doing an action that was harmful to yourself and others, the more you're likely to refrain from it in the future. So there's a relationship here between these 2 powers, regret and restraint. The remedy is the action that you're doing. It might be Vajrasattva mantra. It might be reciting the Heart Sutra. It might be any virtuous action, making satsas, whatever you want to do, meditating on bodhicitta, meditating on emptiness, reciting Golden Light Sutra. All of these types of virtuous activities are very powerful. There's 6 often that are referred to, which are kind of not necessary to know in detail right now, but basically the ones I've just said. Power of restraint, here it is, and it's going with this power of regret. The power of regret is having the remorse for doing it to the point that you will stop doing it again in the future. And you will make a commitment to stop doing it. And it might be for 1 minute. Say it's talking divisively about somebody. You might restrain yourself for 1 minute, 1 hour. For the duration of while I'm asleep, I won't talk divisively about this person. Slowly over time, stronger regret, stronger restraint, you can refrain for a whole day, a week, a lifetime. And then the power of reliance, refuge, bodhicitta. So that's basically taking causal refuge and developing bodhicitta. These are the 4 opponent powers by which we can purify all our negative karma. Okay? All right, so that's a bit of a whirlwind. Thank goodness we didn't go through too much detail on those slides, but we did have to cover some of the details because you do have an exam on this module. So I just want to know where you're at. Do you have any questions that I can answer for you, or find out the answer for next week for you? Do you have any challenges, difficulties, suggestions? Everyone's okay? Yep, go for it, Ludden. Ludden? Yeah, have I said your name right?
I have a question
Go for it.
about the three scopes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think it's when you go through the first and the second and the third,
Yeah.
sometimes I think that it's more logical, the first one, and I kind of grasp into it. So it makes sense that you don't want to have a bad rebirth instead of like having bodhicitta. Do you know what I mean?
I do. You're
I think
relating to it.
sometimes it's better for me, like, to concentrate on bodhicitta more, to give more of my concentration on the third scope.
Oh, you're saying the third scope is one you relate to more. That you relate to the third scope more than the
Because
first.
if I go to the first
Yeah.
one, it's more like logical for my way of thinking. It's more logical for me. But if I give my energy to bodhicitta and third, it might help me better. Like kind of, I feel that it's
Okay.
a waste of time.
Oh,
to
darling, please
begin at
don't
the
say
first.
waste of time. Please, please, please. Please don't say waste of time. We need it all. We need all 3 scopes. We need to not engage in non-virtue, right? We need to not harm those sentient beings we want to bring to enlightenment. We need to cultivate virtue of, saving lives and helping others in whatever capacity. It's all in the small scopes. If there's a hang up with the lower realms, if that's an obstacle, right? We can see the lower realms in the animal realm. Then just let it be known that I don't want to take rebirth as a mosquito, and I've killed 100 mosquitoes. So chances are, there will be a rebirth as mosquitoes. But it sounds like there's a few difficulties. One is probably a difficulty on even accepting future lives.
No, this is, for me, it's logical. Like it's very logical that there's karma, but I don't know how to explain. It's
Yeah.
like for me, having bodhicitta and having the bigger scope, the third one,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Mahayana, it's like it contains everything. So
It contains everything that came before it, which is the small scope and middling scope.
yeah,
It's not practice in isolation. It has everything that came before it. So maybe you have a better understanding than you think, because the bodhicitta and the great scope makes sense to you, but it contains everything that has come before it. Remember, even renunciation,
yeah.
the four truths. And so this next week, Kai, we'll look at the middle scope in more detail, and you'll see how that applies to a great scope practitioner. So
Yeah.
you of the great scope had this, interest in bodhicitta and so forth. You have to practice the preceding scopes in the sense of the topics they contain. But your interest and inclination might be bigger and grander in the great scope, but it cannot be at the exclusion of the other scopes because they
No,
are
of course not.
necessary.
Of
Yeah,
course
so
not.
that's why nothing's like
Yeah,
useless or a waste of
yeah.
time.
I explained that in that way because I think that uh, even if you go like I think it's a big umbrella that contains everything.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it makes no sense to have bodhicitta. You
Exactly.
know
It
what I
makes
mean?
no sense. Exactly. Because look at bodhicitta. It's not something that you can achieve the great scope in one lifetime practicing the sutra path. You have to have a succession of precious human rebirths, which means small scope, future rebirths need to be fortunate, which means you need to practice virtue, which means you need to not go to the lower realms, which is creating non-virtue. You cannot achieve the goal of enlightenment if you're continually born in the lower realms and don't get to practice virtue or meet the teachings.
Uh-huh.
So, if we want to develop this mind of bodhicitta and all of this and become great scope practitioners, then even right down to the very basics of refraining from non-virtuous actions and engaging in perfect wholesome actions, that's the teaching by which we subdue our mind, isn't it? That's the teaching of the Buddha. And we're going to increase that subduing of the mind, increase those ways by which we do not engage in negative actions and cultivate virtuous actions. We're going to increase our ways of our potencies of being able to refrain from non-virtue as we start to develop abandonments, in our mental continuum through the antidotes of, wisdom, realizing, emptiness, and so forth. And how we cultivate pure, perfect actions, not just, saving lives and abstaining from stealing and so forth, but actually, like all the way along the subsequent stages of the path, are we going to develop wholesome actions with bodhicitta motivations and how we care for others and so forth. So it's all related, and it
All
all is a
related.
framework. And those two stages were preliminaries to the great scope. So they're essential. You cannot practice the great scope without those preliminaries.
Yeah,
It's
it will be
impossible.
more effective for me to like again and again begin from the first small
Absolutely.
scope and then why is that, and it's
Absolutely.
lead
Why
me to
is that?
another. Yeah.
Get the links. Get the
Yeah.
links. Go back to that first teaching I gave on the links. Get those links very clear in your mind. Why do I need this? How does it relate to the topic before? How does it relate to the topic that follows? Those links, if you can type up a file with just the links of that slide I gave you, then that will be a perfect meditation, a glance meditation of the entire Lam Rim, focus on the links of how one topic relates to the other. Therefore, how one topic is so important and critical to the next stage. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question before we conclude with dedications? So next week, I want to go into the four truths and look at the reasoning behind that. Joe's got a question. Where I can see you, Joe. There you are.
Hi,
Hi.
just a quick one. Well, not a question, just a comment. I think my eyes and ears have been really opened today, and I think I will approach everything feeling that I can always do more.
Yeah.
So even if I think I'm doing well in one aspect, then I think to keep humility at the forefront of my heart and mind, to say to myself, I can always do more. So thank you. And I bought this book. It came yesterday. Not
Oh,
quite the
brilliant.
same one, but the Great Treatise on the
Lama Tsongkhapa,
stages
the
of the
best.
and it's been owned by someone else, and I think someone similar to me who's had at least one four-legged companion, because
Oh.
the inside the corner is not there. And I just want to say that in my time zone in Scotland, I'm 54 today, but in
Oh,
yours,
happy
I'm still
birthday.
53.
You are. If you get on a plane, yeah, anyway, like that. Yeah,
But
so there
thank
you go.
you.
You're
Thank you.
53. You're welcome, Joe. And remember to rejoice in all the good actions that you are doing, because yes, we can always do more. And we need to embrace that with the sincerity that you're embracing it with, and not with a harsh mind. And I didn't hear a harsh mind from you, but just as a lesson for all of us to rejoice in what we are doing and what we have done to have these conditions that are the results now that are ripening. And yes, we can always do more. And so having that sincere heart that strives to do more, but also knows when to rest. So it's a real balancing act for all of that as well. So happy birthday. And yeah, thank you for joining us on a special day. Yeah. So let's go straight into some dedications then. And then we can see what happens after that. Okay, so Lama Atisha says, in the company of others, guard your speech. When you are alone, guard your mind. All right, so we want to watch our physical actions, particularly on that small scope. All right, so let's just think that we can dedicate this merit that we've created, so much virtue in each moment, creating so much virtue with the bodhicitta motivation. And we can pull all that into one giant ocean of virtue that exists with all the merits of the past, present, and future Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and all sentient beings. And we compile that virtue together for sentient beings to swiftly achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible through the virtues of these merits. We are one of those sentient beings, remember? So while we take care of others, by default, we're always taking care of ourselves. We're never left out. May the precious Supreme Bodhicitta, not yet born, arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. May the precious view of emptiness, not yet born, arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. Then we'll go straight to the long life prayer of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Incomparably kind and supreme, Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, we can recite this second verse as a complete prayer. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, please, to you I make request. Please return quickly. That's what I was thinking. Okay, so that's enough for now. So yeah, hopefully next week we can focus on the four truths. So obviously I can't go in much detail, but do be reading a book like this, or like one Joe had, Lamrim Chemo, is a bit more complicated, or Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand by Pabonka Rinpoche, and do be reading through this as you're doing the course if you can. And I definitely want to put some files in the chat for you, so you can download those now. And also, I'm sure Isabella will also put them in the email for people who are not online at the moment. Give to Zoomers, 4 files. So I'm putting 4 files in there. 3 are screenshots to save you doing the screenshot. And one's a prayer and daily practice, which you don't have to worry about doing until we do the module 8 or whatever it's called, establishing a daily practice. But you might want to start doing pages, I think it was 5, 6, 7. There's a Lamb Rim prayer in there, and it's a good summary of the small scope, middling scope, and great scope. Okay, so hopefully you'll get that. Have you received it in the chat? Yeah, cool. Otherwise, Isabella will send them to you, I'm sure. Okay, so if there's nothing else, anyone who hasn't said anything you'd like to add any more, or otherwise we can conclude? Yeah, everyone's okay? Okay, well, thank you for joining me tonight, and I wish you very well, and I wish you an excellent week. Remember your homework. You've got the quote to apply your understanding, and how does happiness increase as we go through these 3 stages. So these 2 are ongoing homeworks. All right, all the very
Thank
best.
you.
Take good
Thank
care.
you, Isabella. Thank you,
Thank
Faye.
you.
Thanks, Isabella. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Night.
Happy birthday, Joe.
Thank you.
Birthday, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.